Okay, this is where we left off yesterday, having dealt with the EPL or corrections, effective playing length corrections, and now we're ready. That was weird. That changed all by itself. And now we're ready to go on with the evaluation of obstacles. And again, just as a reminder, EPL corrections are primarily what's happening as you stay on the fairway. Obstacle evaluation is primarily what happens if you miss the fairway, although there are a few instances where you have to carry some of these obstacles down the line of play. But for the most part, obstacles are evaluated along the sides of the hole. Okay, first of all, we'll look at, oh, there's another thing I got to get rid of. The accuracy tables, significance of an obstacle is related to the severity of it and the probability of having it come into play. In other words, how likely are you to get into trouble? So obviously the probability of an errant shot is greater for obstacles that are near the line of play or near the green than it is for ones that are far away. Got to get rid of that pop-up control again. And of course, the longer the distance of your shot, the more likely that shot is to get into trouble, because 10 degrees of inaccuracy in your direction has far less consequence if you're only hitting a 100-yard shot. That same 10 degrees on a driver off the tee will go way farther right or left than the shorter one. So we have tables that the USGA originally developed. And the accuracy table deals with the width and depth of the landing zone that statistically you would expect to be within that landing zone at the dimensions cited here 2/3 of the time. The other third, your shots would be more errant and would be outside of these. Now, when you present them in a table like this, the implication at first glance might be that these are rectangles, but in fact, that's not the way things work. They're actually circles or ovals, depending on the shape of the shot pattern. So this provides a perhaps better view of what the accuracy patterns are. And for both men and women here, this shows the oval or circle as the dimensions require for both scratch and bogey at a number of selected distances. So we can see here that for the scratch male golfer, you get an oval which is 20 yards deep and 40 yards wide. And for the bogey man, the oval is in the different direction. The depth, or the length of the shot, if you like, is greater than the width of the pattern. It just has to do with the statistically the way the scratch and bogey golfers hit shots. Over here, we see the similar table or similar graphics for women, ending at the scratch woman's tee shot here, which is an average of 210. But you can see here, it could be as much as 15 yards in either direction, a total of 30 yards wide. And let's see, what are we looking at here? 15, 17, about 34 yards in width. Okay, so again, the longer the shot, the wider these patterns are, these ovals or circles are, and therefore the more likely it is that a golfer is going to get into trouble. Okay. When we get into the tables, the course rating tables in your guide, in many cases, have different rows for different yardage ranges, and those have been generated based on this accuracy pattern information. Okay, some terminology and definitions that we need in evaluating the obstacles. Okay, oh, there we go. Took 3 clicks for some reason. First of them is closely bordering. So an obstacle is deemed to be closely bordering a landing zone or a green if it is within 10 yards in any direction of the outside perimeter of the landing zone or the edge of the green, depending on which you're talking about. Near, an obstacle or condition is considered to be near a landing zone or green if it's within 20 yards in any direction from the perimeter or the edge of the green. So here's something that would illustrate this. This is sort of drawn on Google Earth, a scratch man's tee shot, which would, if you remember our shot tables from yesterday, that shot would on average land at 230 off the tee and would roll an additional 20 yards to 250. So the landing zone then was a rectangle here because, you know, it's the width of the fairway and it's the depth of 20 yards, the roll component. And obstacles near the landing zone would be within the yellow area, 20 yards from any point around the perimeter of the landing zone. If it were the green we were talking about, well then instead of that blue landing zone, we would have essentially the green itself, a lot less regular in shape, of course, and the near line would be 20 yards away. The previous closely bordering would be, as shown in that slide, 10 yards away. What we think of as punitive obstacles, ones that are unusually difficult. In the top left, the photo of looks like a very, very narrow fairway with a whole bunch of bunkers, some of them pot bunkers along each side. That would be a punitive situation. And in the lower right, the bunker so deep that you need steps to go down into it and out of it. That would, of course, be a very punitive bunker. Obstacles that are considered to not exist. If an obstacle is more than 50 yards measured from the middle of the fairway or the middle of the green, it is considered that it does not exist on that hole. Used to be that we had different values there for the men and women, but that's been revised and is now 50 yards for both men and women. The tweener. The tweener is what happens when we have a value that falls between two table values. Here, looking at a fairway rating table, we have a 5 for the 20 to 24 and a 3 for the 25 to 29. And that's only 1 yard difference. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for the rating to change by 2 points just for moving 1 more yard. So we would use as a tweener value the 4 falling between those two. And what I have done starting a number of years ago is actually make new tables, putting in the tweener values where appropriate, and making it for a more linear flow of values. And the other thing you'll notice here, if you have an unmodified guidebook, you might notice that my columns are in a different order than theirs. Let's just break out of this one for a moment. Where have I got that? Here we go. That's the one. Okay, this is the fairway table as it exists in the guidebooks as printed. And they go from greater than 45, and then they flip the direction around and go 35 to 45. Then they go to the next table and they flip again and go 30 to 34, et cetera, et cetera. Now, as a former teacher, that's not the way we teach kids to read numbers. It's not the way in adult education we teach people to read numbers either. Numbers should progress in a sequence and not jump around like this. They should have, if they wanted to have this order, they should have had this one, say 45 down to 35, and then this next one should have said 34 down to 30, 29 down to 25, etc. But even that is just the exact opposite of the way people are taught numbers in school. So that's why when I did the tweener tables a number of years ago, starting a number of years ago, I put the columns in the other order. The values are still the same. Nothing's been changed that way, but it's a lot easier to read from small to large numbers going from left to right, because that's the way we're used to seeing them. There we go. So throughout this presentation, you'll see those revised tables in terms of the order of the columns. Now, I think some of you have got tweener tables from Gulf, Saskatchewan before and have used them in your guidebooks as well. We used to just have them printed and then we'd cut them out and tape them in with clear plastic tape. We've gone more modern recently, and Brian Lee has come up with a way and a company that can print them for us so that they're now printed on vinyl that is have removable sticky back, so you can just peel the backs off, cut them into the right sizes, and peel the back off and just stick them right in the guidebook over the existing tables without the messy using packing tape and so on. So later on, if you decide you want to change your guidebooks to this, you can get information from Brian Lee on what specific not paper product, but printing product was used for that, and it's not terribly expensive, and it's quite effective. Anyway, moving on. The tweeners here, it's highly recommended that you use tweeners, not just on the fairway table, but there's still a few others. Although in revisions to the course rating guides, they have eliminated a lot of the need for tweeners, but there are still some. Okay, the concept of toggling. This is where we have things that are a little bit subjective, shall we say, in terms of whether, in this example, a green is relatively flat or moderately contoured. And you find, and certainly in Saskatchewan, we have found that in a lot of cases, the greens at the courses that we rate are kind of on the borderline between relatively flat and moderately contoured. So the solution there, rather than picking one, we make the decision that we're going to toggle them back and forth, so that as we get to greens that again seem to be right on the borderline between relatively flat and moderately contoured, we'll say, well, okay, this one will do relatively flat. The next one we'll say is moderately contoured. The third one that's similar, back to relatively flat, and so on. And that would give us, we think, a better average of the green, in this case, the green surface rating for that golf course. Okay, any questions on obstacle terminology?
Richard, there's a couple questions here. One just asking about the presentation and how do we get a copy of it?
Okay. You're talking about a recording of the of this session or the slideshow?
Maybe either. It doesn't say.
We will be making that slideshow available. It's of course a PowerPoint show, so that anybody that has Microsoft Office can run it as a slideshow. We could make a PDF of it, but the problem with PDF is that it shows the end condition of each slide, and if there's been multiple animations on the slide, it gets very confusing. So the only thing is, of course, the presentation is way too big to email. So what we will arrange to do, this slideshow will be uploaded. We aren't sure exactly where yet. We're thinking it might end up on the Golf Canada Handicap and Course Rating Huddle page, or we may put it on a cloud server for Golf Saskatchewan. Once we get that finalized, which will probably be within a few days, we'll send out to everybody the information of how to download the PowerPoint. Just one thing everybody should be aware of, because this goes way back before we had PowerPoint and all that, when we were just strictly paper and guide and so on. The World Handicap System, or before it, the USGA, which developed the system, this information is for volunteer and association use only, and should not be given to the general public. It would be fine to have people observe the slide presentation that ended up not being your volunteers. I mean, we can't control that, but the thing is, there's enough detail in the presentation that somebody could actually reconstruct the guide from it, and for proprietary reasons, World Handicap System, rightly so, reserves those rights. So we will certainly let the associations have it and run it for their volunteers and prospective volunteers. No problem there, but it should not be made available in its raw form outside of your associations.
Okay, there's one more question here.
Yep.
Page 5 of the guide talks about obstacles do not exist. However, there are comments in this section where they exist outside the 50 yards. You give a minimum rating of 1. Can you elaborate on that?
Just a minute. Let me get to the guide. Probably need to find my different glasses too before all is said and done. Okay. All right, obstacles. Okay, what it's saying, what I'm reading here, obstacles less than 50 yards from the center of the fairway exist on the hole and should be rated at least 1. It's not talking there about obstacles beyond 50 being considered to exist. So the interpretation there is if it's more than 50, it just isn't there. It might as well just be flat, bare land. Now, there's one little quirk that we will be talking about later having to do with shots that have to cross over an obstacle, but it's not as much of an obstacle and it doesn't get a rating number, but we will be getting to that a little later today. But as far as that goes, I would not give any number at all to something which is outside that 50 yards over the entire line of play.
Okay. I think that's all the questions so far.
All right, moving on then. If I can get, oh, here we go. That thing popped up again. Okay, back to the obstacle rating form. Now we saw this yesterday, but let's go over it one more time here. We've got this area up here, and this, of course, repeats for 3 columns per page. That keeps, oh, we've got people still, every time somebody comes into the chat room, it seems to pop up this. Well, we'll see if we can. Okay, so this was the area for the hole number, the par, the length of the hole, and if you're having to rate the tee to green elevation, you'd put the tee altitude here from your altimeter, assuming you're using one. Okay, we've got this area down here, which was the theoretical or the book distance to the green from the end of each landing zone. And we saw yesterday there's a spreadsheet that can help you with that, and we're certainly quite willing to make that spreadsheet available upon request as well. Back up here is where we put our dogleg force layup information. Here is where we put the roll. These, of course, are the EPL corrections that we discussed yesterday. And when we had to make an adjusted distance to the green because of an EPL correction, this is the row that we put the adjusted distances to the green in. Down here, and this is where we're essentially going to be starting today, this big area down here is the area where we record the obstacle information, measurements to the obstacle, table values, and so on, shot-specific adjustments. And throughout here, the gray shaded columns are for the bogey golfer. And then back up here in this section is where our summary values go. And this is where we end up in this area is this all the information, kind of the final answer, if you want to paraphrase that TV show, the information which will actually be entered into the course rating application. So concentrating now on that part of the form where we actually record our measurements and our intermediate values. Again, the book distance to the green, any adjusted distance to the green if there were EPL corrections. The next bit here is where we'll be recording things having to do with the topography obstacle rating. That includes an evaluation of the stance and lie or lie at the landing zone. Has to do with what the approach shot elevation to the green is, because those are the things that we use in the topography table or the topography rating. Down here we have a line where we can put codes and notes for rough and recovery. Codes like L for layup, I for inconsistent, M for mound, C for carry. We'll see those adjustment codes in detail, of course, when we get down to that specific obstacle in a little while. And then the balance of this is where we put all of the data, the measurements that we take of the width of the fairway, measurements that we take to the lateral obstacles, for example, and the table values that we get from that information all goes in this larger area. And as we go through this presentation, you'll see specifically how we address that for each of the obstacles. So the first of them is topography. Okay, the impact on play of the terrain within a landing zone. This topography is a bit of an exception in a way, because most of the obstacles that we talk about are at the edge, outside of the fairway. Topography, on the other hand, is what is happening in the fairway within the landing zone. Okay, so it amounts to if there are slopes or mounds in the landing zones that affect your stance and or your lie, or if it's an approach shot that's going to go from that landing zone to the green, then is it an uphill or downhill or a relatively flat shot? So this is what the table looks like. Saskatchewan people, you'll remember that in previous rounds, we put this column in. It was originally left as tweeners, but it's now been officially put in as a column to be used. So we're going to have to evaluate what kind of problem we have, if any, for stance or lie. We're going to have to evaluate here, if it's an approach shot to the green from there, then is it uphill or downhill? And if so, how much? So this is what a minor problem might look like. As you can see, the fairway here is pretty darn close to being dead level. This one I would call a minor to moderate topography. It's, you're going to more often than not, you're going to have the ball either above or below your feet, depending on whether you're right-handed or left-handed. This one is the moderately awkward topography. As you can see, the surface of the fairway is getting more and more irregular in terms of smoothness. So you're going to have more awkward stance probably in this one than you had on the previous one. Significantly awkward, similar to the previous slide, only more so, more contoured terrain in the fairway. And extremely awkward topography, sort of more resembling moguls on a ski slope than what we normally would think of as a fairway. Questions about topography? Okay. The next one is fairway. And fairway itself is not an obstacle, but it defines where the rough begins. So I guess we could come up with a different name for it, something long like, where does the rough start? But just calling it fairway seems to be clear enough. The difference here, of course, is that the bigger the fairway is, the easier it is to play the hole. So its boundaries then define where the rough begins. And again, we looked at this one just a moment ago as a sort of part of the definition of tweeners. So this is the tweener table version of the fairway table. This has changed a little bit. It used to be that there were two separate tables, one for men and one for women. And they've changed that now so that the values in here for different widths are consistent from one to another. And the difference is the shot length for men or from women, or that would correspond to that row of the table. So if you're evaluating a fairway for the man, you'd look at the yardage range of the hole over here and then go find your width column. If you're rating that hole for women, you'd use the yardages over here to determine what row you should be in. Okay. Now, usually we would, if the sides of the landing zone weren't already parallel, if the fairway width changes within the length of that landing zone, we would take an average normally. Okay, here's a couple of considerations here. Okay, if that's the measurements, the widths at the beginning, the dotted line, and the end, the solid line of the landing zone, we would take the average there. But if the landing zone were a little farther along and the beginning was right at that bunker and the end of the landing zone was further along, we would take the width at the narrow part, because the chances of the ball ever getting into this part are pretty slim, because it would be landing probably right at the bunker, most likely to land in the bunker. So this part of the fairway isn't really accessible. Now you might say, well, yeah, it can maybe roll down a little bit. Sure, but as a general rule, if an obstacle like this is at the beginning of the landing zone, we would take that width. Whereas on the previous one, if it's at the end, that's fine. We'll average it out because it's only at the very end of the landing zone that is in play. Okay, I'm probably going to have to drag this somewhere or get rid of it for a while. Fairway rating adjustments. They've changed some of these from what we had before. The L-1 is not a change. That's if the player has laid up, either a forced layup or a layup by choice, as discussed yesterday, or hits a less than full shot due to a dog leg bend in the fairway. Again, we discussed that. If that's the case, an L-1 adjustment to the fairway rating is put in. Now, just a word about that. On a longer hole, say a 3-shot hole, you're going to have 2 landing zones. And if the fairway is different width at those 2 landing zones, we always use the higher rated value. So if the layup occurred off the tee, it might reduce that specific shot, but the second landing zone, which maybe started out the same value, will not be reduced by the L-1. So again, just tossing out some numbers. Let's say you had a 5 off the table at each of those 2 landing zones, but the first one was reduced by the L-1. That's not going to matter, because the second one, if it's still a 5, that's the higher value and that's the rating you use. Now you can also, from this, because it's shot specific, if by chance there are 2 layups on the same hole, then you'd have to apply it at each of them. Okay, the visibility. A V+1 can be applied if no part of the landing zone is visible and it is difficult to determine the line of play. Now, it's important to note here that there are many cases where you can't see the landing zone, but you can still quite easily determine the line of play. Consider this situation. You're going over a hill, but you're on a course, on a hole which has been cut out of tall trees. So you can see on your right and your left where the lines of trees are going. So you can still determine the line of play, even though you maybe can't see the land itself. But on the other hand, if you go over a hill on a more or less featureless course where there aren't any trees to give you direction, then that would definitely be a candidate for this visibility adjustment. Okay, width adjustment, and there are a number of different ones here, and these are the ones that have been changed a little bit. We could apply W+1 if the fairway width is effectively reduced by a dog leg, overhanging tree branches that your shot might hit, contour or tilt, so the shot must be played to one side, or severe obstacles closely border the fairway landing zone. Okay. Remember, that's closely bordered, not near. Closely bordered is 10 yards. We could have a W+2 adjustment if the fairway width is effectively reduced when a majority of the landing zone is tilted, sloped right to left or left to right, and the balls are quite likely to end up in the rough. Okay, that's a more serious increase in the value. We could do a W-1 if the effective width of a fairway is increased because you've got hillsides or mounding along, closely bordering the fairway, and it will bounce some of the balls, some of the errant shots would bounce back into the fairway. We could have a W-1 if there's a narrow landing zone width, high table value, but the shots can be hit from the rough on one side as easily from those from the fairway. Or W-2, again, a narrow landing zone. Shots can be hit from the rough on both sides as easily as those from the fairway. This is one of the changes for this round. It used to read this one as just W-1 or -2 and didn't say much more about it. But they are now saying, here's how you should decide between the -1 and the -2. If you can quite easily chip the ball onto the green from both sides in this situation, go for the -2. But if there's something on one side or the other that means you can't hit easily from there, for example, maybe on one side there's a bunker over there, so that if you've missed this narrow fairway to the left, you're in a bunker. Well, then, assuming you could play easily from the other side, then the W-1 would be the appropriate one. Then there's also the unpleasant adjustment, poor turf condition, hard pan. We find on some courses in Saskatchewan on some of the holes, because of alkaline soil, the fairway are very poor turf condition. So unless they're using preferred lie throughout the entire season, we could put a U+1 adjustment in. And just a reminder, all of the adjustments marked with the asterisk are shot specific, which means that they can apply multiple times on a hole if it's appropriate to do so. Oh, and one other thing, just again as a reminder, because some obstacle adjustments depend on others, we should always evaluate the adjustments in the order which we find them in the guide. So if we're doing fairway, we would start off by looking at, is there a layup adjustment? Is there a visibility adjustment? Is there a width adjustment, etc.? Okay, so here's an example. Same. Okay, there's a possibility there, but because of that slope to the right, shots which would otherwise miss the fairway on the right might bounce down onto the fairway. So that what the rating team has to do is take a good look at that rough over here. It might be that that rough is so thick that it'll just catch the ball and keep it rather than bounce it down. On the other hand, if it's sparse or if it's cut rough going a little further, that is not as not so thick that it's going to trap the ball. If you think that the ball will go down there, then the W-1 would be appropriate. If it gets hung up, then do not apply the W-1 to this. Okay, Here again, width adjustment. This is one of those ones where you've got a fairway which narrows right in just short of the green. So if you have a landing zone that is in that area just short of the green, it looks in this case like it would be, didn't mean to do that. This could be W minus 2 because you could hit onto the green from either side. Now, if we had a big bunker on one side or the other, then you'd have to go with -1 only. So here's an example. We're going to be using the MINS rating here. You can see down here, overall, it's a 430-yard hole from the tees that we're measuring here. So there's our first landing zone, our landing zone for bogey, 42 yards wide. And here's where we put it on the obstacle form. This next one, the white one, 34 width, that'll be where the scratch golfer's landing zone ends. And that we measure off, find that to be 34. That goes here in the scratch column. And this hole is long enough that bogey will have a second landing, can't reach this green in 2. Up here, it's narrower, it's 26 yards wide, and that goes here in the second landing zone column for bogey. Okay, from the table now, 430-yard hole, and we're for min, so we've identified the bottom row here as being the appropriate one. And firstly here for scratch, the 34 width is in this column. So that gets us a 4 for scratch at the landing zone. Here's just under where we recorded the width is where we put the table value for that landing zone. For the bogey now, the 42 width is in this column. That gets us a 3 from the table. Goes here. And then the second landing zone similarly gets a 5, which goes here. And this is why we have all of these columns, so that we can very easily keep track of what happens at which landing zone. Okay. So when there's 2 or more landing zones on a long hole, we rate it and take the highest value. That's going to come into effect here. But first of all, there's only 1 for scratch, of course, so that was a 4. But the higher of these 2 here is the 5, so it's the 5 that we put up into our final answer section. And there are no non-shot specific adjustments here. You know, we would have the U+1 up here if it existed, but here there's no further adjustments required. So the final values are the same respectively as the table, the values, the highest values that we had in here. Some interpretations. How do we rate a landing zone if there's no fairway? And the answer, normally what would happen here is there would have to be a roll adjustment, because unless the fairway is almost non-existent, any tee shot which lands in the rough is not going to roll out as far as one which lands on the fairway. So what we would do is make sure that we apply the roll adjustment first of all. But then for a fairway rating, we would use the less than 20-yard wide column, because of course 0 is a number too, and there is no fairway, so the number is 0. Then if the rough is easy enough to play out, you might put a W-1 or W-2 adjustment on it. But I would doubt it, unless this landing zone that you can't quite reach is up close to the green, in which case it's kind of silly why they didn't make more fairway. Then if you've got a relatively long shot, for almost anybody, it's going to be easier to hit from fairway than it is from any kind of normal cut rough. So the chances of applying the W-1 or W-2 in this situation are, in my opinion, very, very slim. Okay, then we would evaluate the other obstacles that might exist at that landing zone. Even though it's in the rough, we still would measure to other obstacles. Okay, questions about fairway?
Yeah, there's a few questions here. There was actually one from the last section that came up. If there are 2 or more rough cuts, does the fairway width include any of them? That was for the last section.
Okay, let me deal with that one first then, Candace.
Okay.
Yeah, normally what we do is we take one of those, it's usually only 1 mower width wide. We take one of them and include it in the fairway, and on the other side we don't. So, or you could put half of it, in each, and measure from the middle of that 1 mower width to the middle of the 1 mower width on the other side. So yes, it's included when it exists as sort of being half in and half out.
And when fairway rating 3-shot holes, how come we are using the hole length for each landing zone versus the shot distance to that landing zone?
Well, you actually would. In those earlier slides, remember the one where we had the dotted line for the start and the solid line for the end. We do our measurements of other obstacles at the end of that because it's assumed that's where the ball comes to rest. But if the width is different at the beginning and the end, then we would either average it, or if it was narrowest at the start where the ball first lands and the wider part further on was protected by a bunker or something like that, we'd use the narrower one. But we certainly should have a look at it. And in terms of measuring whether something is close enough to be counted, go back and think about that slide that was showing near a landing zone, that within 20 yards in any direction from any part of the landing zone. So that would certainly could be taken from the beginning of the landing zone, not just from the end. But we do our actual available, our rating of other obstacles at the end, because that's where the shot normally will end up.
Okay, it says, I'm referring to the table entry. For example, we entered hole length for each landing zone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because again, the landing zone starts where the ball hits the ground, but it ends where the rollout is complete. That's where the next shot will be hit from.
Okay. That's all the questions that are on here right now.
Okay, thanks, Candace.
No problem.
Okay, the next obstacle is green target. First thing we have to do in evaluating green target is figure out how big the green is, essentially what we call the effective diameter of the green. And for a lot of greens, it's fairly simple. Doesn't have to be a sort of a rounded off rectangle like this, but in most cases, we measure the width and the depth of the green and just take a simple average. So here we record the width and the depth on the form, 32 by 26, effective diameter, just the average of those two, 29. Then we have types of green which one of the dimensions is more than twice the other. Example here, one which is 30 by 14. If that is the case, we take an average of 2 times the short and the 1 long. So here we would essentially average 2 of the 14s with the 30, divide by 3 in that case would give you 19 for the effective diameter of this green. And again, we would record it 30, 14, effective diameter 19. Now, just for those of you who are the ones that also enter the data into the course rating application, the software will do this for you. It will correctly deal with these greater than 2 to 1 greens just by putting in the numbers. But of course, you will have already needed to do that because you're out in the field and you need that value to carry on. But when it's entered, it calculates it for you. Then the next category is the ones where one dimension is more than 3 times the other. This one would be that kind. Then you would take 3 of the short ones and 1 long and divide by 4. So for this case, the 3 12s, that's 36, and I don't like the way they put the equal signs in the book, but you get the picture anyway. It's 3 12s plus 40, which is 76, divided by 4. Then that gives you the 19. Just a coincidence that there's 19 in both of them. Then there are other oddly shaped greens. This one here, for example. We can average, or we can do weighted average as the case may be. In this one, they're suggesting that the depth of the green, so presumably we're coming at the green either this way or this way, or sorry, no, the depth. Yeah, so, and the width is 30. So anyway, what they're suggesting is we would want to take some sort of an average of the 10 and the 22. So they say using 16 as an average would probably be appropriate somewhere in here. And the effective diameter would be the 30 plus within this section here, we would average the 10 and the 22. And then we're averaging that with the 30, which ends up giving us a 23. Now in the field, we sometimes say, well, I think we can do this a little faster and just have one person stand about here and the other person stand over here and maybe take a pace or two off the green to allow for the curve here. And chances are we're going to end up having arrived at the same value. So yeah, we could do the average of the two parts this way, or we could just try to allow for the curve and to take a single measurement, probably be within one yard or anyway. And the green target table has a range of average diameters in any case. Whoops. Then there's the circle concept, essentially identified by greens that are of a shape where there are parts of the green that you cannot putt to other parts of the green from. So if we were over here and the flag was over here, well, how do we get there? You know, chip it over. The greenskeepers don't like that, particularly if you take a gouge out of the green. But what we do in terms of rating it is we would think of this as two circles or ovals. And in this case, one of them is significantly bigger than the other and will therefore likely have the pin positions, more pin positions than the smaller one. And you can always check that, by the way. Just walk around the green looking for where the hole has been recently and on this part too, and you'll get a decent enough idea of the weighting that you might want to use between the two circles. Okay, so this one had a 27 effective diameter, this one a 21, and they're suggesting we take two 27s and one 21 because this one here has roughly twice as many flag locations as this one here. If I would have been doing this one, I would probably have made this smaller because we're already including this in the one. So I would have tended more to make this one. There's some overlap is okay, but I wouldn't have gone all the way to the back there. It'd have maybe been something more like that. So you could also, of course, have said, okay, I'm going to do this one as a big one and this one as a small one. I just don't like how much overlap there is here. It's not seriously wrong, but I wouldn't maybe have had both of them the full size that they did there. There is the note here that if either of your circles here, or your ovals really, looked like they maybe were in the greater than 2 to 1, like this one, in this case, you don't apply the greater than 2 to 1 averaging because the averaging is already going to be dealt with by the way the circle is calculated. So you don't want to essentially double count the shape. Okay, a tiered green. So this one here, you wouldn't do this as two circles. You would do that as a single green with a tier, with two tiers and a ramp in between. And we'll see a little bit more about the definition of tiered and so on a few slides from now. Okay, and it can be applied, the tiered adjustment can be applied to a green diameter that has been reduced due to 2 to 1, 3 to 1, or circle measurement concept. So this is an example of the women's green target table. Again, you'll note that I have reversed the order of the columns, but not their contents. So as an example, the green has an effective diameter of 23 yards. That means we're going to be in this column here. And it's a 138-yard shot, which for scratch is in this row here. So the scratch green target table value is 5. On a different hole, just to illustrate how we do it for bogey, if we've got a 28-yard effective diameter, we're in this column. And let's assume that she has a 55-yard shot, puts us in this row. And her green target table value would be a 3. Okay, now the transition zone. This is one that's always tricky. They have for us tried to simplify things a little bit in this latest version so that it's a little clearer what we should do and a little simpler in terms of what all we have to do. So what happens here is we get the transition zone where a long shot can barely reach the center of the green. In other words, the average shot cannot reach the center of the green, but certainly it's possible that some of the longer than average shots might get onto the green. So those, the green target would be high, anywhere from 4 to 10, depending. But if that long shot cannot reach the center of the green and you're left with a short pitch or chip shot, that's going to normally just give you a little 2 value in your green target table. So what the transition zone is all about is taking the intermediate situation and say, well, because of the accuracy table shape, some of the time that shot is going to get there up to the center of the green. Some of the time it's not. Some of the times it may not even quite be on the green. So we want to have a way of averaging that, which because the same golfer some days will be doing one and same other days will be doing the other thing. So the definition, the area close to or on the green that is just beyond the average distance a scratch or bogey player can expect to hit with consistency. So for a single shot hole, the transition zone is 10 yards. On a 2 shot, because you can have the accuracy table involved twice really, or more, we use a 20-yard transition zone. Okay, so how do we find these? Well, if you're looking at your obstacle rating form, where we're looking there at the remaining distance to the green row, the last one is the one that's actually the approach shot. So if you, on a 2 or more shot hole, for example, if your remaining distance to the green from your last fairway landing zone is 20 yards or less, then you should have a look at this with the transition zone concept in mind. Okay. Now, notwithstanding, also consider the situation. If you have, for example, a bunker which blocks a good chunk of the front of the green, well, then those shots don't have any hope of rolling up to the pin. So you wouldn't even use the transition zone. You'd take a landing zone down there in front and just use only the short shot remaining to get your green target. So in that green target table, because the default suggestion is that if you're going to have one of these transition zone situations, start out by assuming that it's going to be 50-50, that half of the time he or she will get there, other half he or she won't get there. So they've already then put a column, or sorry, a row in the table, which gives you the average of the longs and the shorts. So like here, the 6 is the average of the 10 and the 2 and all the way across. So rather than you having to do that, it says if it's going to be a 50-50 transition, just use values from this transition row of either the men or women's tables, as the case may be. And then they also say that if it's not going to be 50-50, we can make a little bit of adjustment to reflect that. We can move that transition table value plus or minus 1 point. If the center of the green is close to the front, that would be a +1. If it's a little closer to the back, that would be a -1. Why is the front plus? You might think, well, that's it's making it shorter. Why is that the 1? Well, if the center of the green is close to the front of the transition zone, that means that more often it's the shot's going to get there. Then that means you're going to be using more of the long value than of the short. But if the center of the green is way back, let's say out of that 20 transition zone, if it's way back there at 18, well, then fewer of the original approach shots are going to get there. And in your average, you should be using more weight on the short shot than on the long shot. And that's why that becomes a -1, sort of moving it in the direction of the short shot. A little tricky to get your head around, but you just have to start thinking about what this really means is, do we get the long shot or the short shot more often than half time? Okay, targets for green target adjustments, rather. You could have a visibility +1 if less than half of the surface of the green is visible. Or it could be V +2 if it's a completely blind shot to the green. In other words, you can't even see the top of the flag. You only know from what the yardage is what sort of shot you should be hitting. We would have possibly an obstructed, and this is what happens if there's a tree in front of or which has branches overhanging the green that would get in the way of somebody's approach shot. Tiered, a T +1. See the definition on page 3, and we're also going to see it in the following slide. You could have an F +1 if the green is unusually firm. In other words, if a well-struck shot by scratch players will frequently bounce over the green. Or if the green's unusually soft, an F -1. Shots, this can be identified if the shots of the green leave deep pitch marks on the green or possibly even plug on the green. So a tiered green, it's hard to see in a two-dimensional photograph, but up here, this looks like the top, it looks like there's a tier up there. And then the ramp down here and another T down here, sort of like this. So that you've got two identifiable, more or less flat tiers joined by a ramp. So by definition then, a green must have a minimum of 2 definite plateaus or tiers separated by a 2-foot or greater elevation difference. And the elevation change area must include a significant portion of the green, and a ball will not normally remain at rest if you try to place it on that ramp. I don't mean drop it, but actually just bend over and try to just place it with your hand. If it rolls away down that ramp, down to the lower tier, then yes, that will qualify. This is a bit changed from previous. We used to say it had to include at least half of the green. Now they've said, as long as it's a significant portion of the green, and as course raters, we feel it's going to come into play fairly frequently, then we can go ahead and call it a tier. Another thing that is not in here, but it came up, I noticed we have Sean Hall from Golf Canada on the meeting now, and Sean will remember this too, because he and I were both at the USGA calibration in San Diego over a year ago, and they had one where they had 3 tiers and 2 ramps, and it didn't really look like either ramp met the 2-foot change, but if you compared the top to the bottom, it was certainly well over 2 feet, and the word from the presenters was that it would be okay to call that a tiered green, even though the individual tiers were not separated but by the 2 feet. But if you had to hit a shot from the top tier all the way down to a hole on the bottom, you certainly would have a difficult shot adjusting for those 2 ramps, or vice versa from the front up to the back. So in the rare case where you get something like that, it would be okay to say, yes, that is a tiered green, even though it's a little bit unusual from the definition. Okay, so there's a green target adjustment, and there will also be a green surface adjustment for bogey golfers when we do the actual rating, if we have a tiered green. So, questions about green target?
There's a couple questions.
Okay.
This is going back a bit to the beginning of this section. What if the player cannot get to the center of the green, but is on the green, for example, on a large green?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we're trying to look at sort of the 50-50, the a little bit short, the a little bit long. My sort of gut feeling is that if enough of the player's accuracy table is on a very deep green, so that I'm pretty sure that that there aren't going to be any that are so short as to miss the green entirely, you would definitely nudge that target value to favor the long shot. You might even say that, you know, again, in extreme case, if I get one where I've got a remaining shot to the green that's supposed to only be one or 2 yards long, chances are going to say, oh, I think he or she is there all the time and not even transition it at all. So you have to use a little bit of judgment here. I think the intent of all of this with the transition is, are there going to be times when the golfer has to chip on? Okay, then definitely we have to see how many, what percentage of the time that would happen. If in almost all cases, or at least in 2/3 of the cases, because the whole accuracy pattern is on the green, then that golfer is going to be putting. It'll be a longer putt, sure, but I would, I might tend to favor certainly the longer shot, maybe even more than just nudging it by 1. Again, you have to sort of think beyond what's written and think a bit about what we think is intended, what is the purpose. And it's really a purpose to sort of get a balance between chipping on and putting. in my opinion.
Okay. Another question, if you apply transition zone on a par 3, will you also apply the 3 adjustment?
No. If you apply, and I'm talking about now, if you're talking about the scratch, if the scratch transitions, then you have to call it a par 4, because at least some of the time scratch isn't going to get to the center of the green. So no, I would, and then that par 3 adjustment for bogey, well, that then you go to treat it as a par 4 for bogey as well. Okay.
Gord says we have a few greens that have a distinct hump going across the green, up from the front and then down to the back of the green. Would you consider
the dead elephant hole? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you wouldn't consider those to be tiers, but certainly you're looking at it at the very least a moderately contoured green. So I think that may be better addressed when we get down to green surface towards the end of today's presentation. So
okay.
Good question, but I don't think this is quite the right place to be answering it, because for green target point of view, no, you would simply just measure the hole the way you would normally. But for green surface considerations, then yes, it's a very good question.
Sounds good. That was the last one on there so far.
Okay, thank you. So one implication of the transition zone is that it does have an effect on other obstacles, not just on green target. As far as an effect on the rough and recoverability, or the R&R, and the bunker ratings, you don't have to do anything further, because those two obstacle ratings use the green target as part of the process, and we've already made the adjustment in getting the green target value. And here's where a little change to help us out with the process has been made. The idea now is, if the player reaches the center of the green 50% or more of the time on the long shot, don't even bother measuring a landing zone just short of the green. Just use the obstacle values from the green. And if, on the other hand, you don't even have to, if you think that the player is going to come up short of the green more than 50% of the time, or in particular, if you think about the accuracy pattern, that more of that accuracy pattern is going to be short of the edge of the green, then what we would do is assign an area, just an arbitrary area, 10 yards short of the front of the edge of the green, call that the landing zone, and rate it for topography, fairway, obstacles, and trees. And just to note that if this is the case, if you are creating or defining a landing zone just in front of the green, then it's quite possible that greenside bunkers might qualify as fairway bunkers for that particular shot, which would have an effect on your bunker rating. Okay, the next one is recoverability and rough, and hardly ever do we talk about this with its full name. It's just R&R. It's an evaluation of, I guess, really the nature of the rough that we encounter if we miss the landing zone, miss the fairway at the landing zone, or miss the green. So the nature of the rough, how difficult is it to recover from? Okay, based on the difficulty of the green and the type of rough grasses and their height, things like rise and drop around the green, mounds along the fairway or at the green, or other miscellaneous conditions which will be identified in the adjustments. So here are the R&R tables. In all cases, you come into the appropriate table from the left to do the scratch rating, from the right to do the bogey rating, and then you look here at the rough height. Now, when we're evaluating rough height, that's typically done by talking to the superintendent before we do the rating. How high is the mower set to cut the rough, and how often is it that they mow it? And I guess, are you talking about a climate that gets a fair amount of rain, or does the rough get a fair amount of water from the irrigation system compared to others? To come up with what we think the average rough height is going to be. Now, it is noted here that the table really is referring to the average rough height of the hole. So if we have got an average from the superintendent, that comes kind of be the default that we would use, but we still have to look at the rough on each hole to see if it's longer than average, shorter than average, maybe it's thicker than average in terms of how hard it is to get a club through it. And if necessary, we have to apply a different rough height to one hole, maybe compared to some other, to the average. Okay, also here there are possible tweeners. If the average rough height on the hole is maybe 1 3/4 and the rough is thicker than normal, it would be appropriate to use the tweener value between the columns to get the R&R table value. Conversely, if the rough is kind of wispy, more so than normal, you might on that hole use the tweener values that would exist between the less than 2 and the 2 to 3, or 2 and 2.5 for women columns. Interpretation. How do we account for rough that's particularly dense or thin? Well, you might even, if there were no tweener table value available between the one column and the next, you might move all the way to the next adjacent column to reflect the more difficult rough, where the ball tends to sit down in the rough, where the rough is thick and gets a lot of water, and it's hard to get the club head through. As kind of an aside, at Katepwa Beach, where I am a member, when we built the course, we put in 2-row irrigation rather than just 1 row down the middle. So a lot of our rough at the edge of the fairways, even though our fairways are wide, the rough is very thick because it gets regular water from the same watering that the fairway is getting. So we would have to take that into consideration in terms of which column we should be using to reflect the thicker rough than most of the courses around this part of Saskatchewan. Okay, so what was said here in their answer would apply to the tables that don't already have a tweener that can be used to achieve the same result. Adjustments to R&R. We had the L-1 adjustment on fairway. We have it again on layups for R&R. Similar sort of reasoning goes here. If you have hit a layup, you've hit a shorter shot, and the accuracy patterns tell us that a shorter shot is less likely to get into trouble than the full shot. So we should reduce the value of the rough for shots on which the player lays up. Now, again, this is shot specific. Excuse me. The inconsistent adjustment, and that can be due to the rough near a landing zone is much more severe or much less severe. It could be an inconsistent minus. And here we're talking about really within the hole rather than from hole to hole, where the rough at the green and the rough at the landing zones are different. And then another way we could get the inconsistent +1 is if a significant portion of the green is closely bordered by sloping ground cut short. What you'll hear them refer to on television, you'll hear them often call those collection areas, where if you go over or slightly miss the green, the ball will roll all the way down into a closely mown area that's maybe 15 feet below the surface of the green and quite difficult to recover from. The M+1, mounding. Mounds or hollows, grassy hollows we're talking about here, are present near the fairway landing zone or closely bordering the green. Consider their severity, number, and location. And again, remember, at the fairway, they only have to be near the edge of the fairway. That's 20 yards. But if they're mounds at the green, they must be closely bordering the green, i.e. they must be within 10 yards of the edge of the green. Okay, and a definition, up to 4 playable sides that impact your stance or your lie. And again, another reminder, if they're actually in the fairway, they're rated under topography, not R&R. It's just the ones in the rough or around the green that are rated under R&R. And a change from previous years, there is no longer a separate rise and drop adjustment. They have moved that into being one of the a case of an adjustment for mounding. So if again you have a rise and drop greater than 5 feet around a significant portion of the green, and again we don't have to measure it to be exactly higher, half or more or anything like that. Just if it's going to be significant that there's a lot of rise and drop, we still make the adjustment, but we make it as a mound adjustment and not an R adjustment. And as was the case when it was its own adjustment, if the rise and drop is greater than 10 feet and or the grass mounds are severe, closely bordering the green, it could be an M+2. I think one of the reasons that they combined the rise and drop into the mounds rather than leaving them separate is that there was a tendency for people to rate both on at a given green, and that was never the intent. So it was always supposed to be one or the other, mounds or rise and drop. So by putting it all into the M, we now get the different cases of the M adjustment, and we don't accidentally double count by having both mounds and rise and drop right at the same place. All right, a look at what mounds look like. Okay, evaluating the lie and stance you'd have and so on. Here's one that used to be called rise or drop. So if we say a significant portion of this green is closely bordered by rise and drop of 7 feet, that would now be an M+1, not an R+1 adjustment. So the adjustment is still made. It's just an M, not an R. Okay. Interpretation. Mounding is another example of where we often toggle back and forth. We had mentioned it when we looked at the definition of toggling. We had looked at the example of whether it had to do with the contour of green surfaces. Mounding is the other area probably gets the most frequent use of this toggling, because you may have a situation where there are mounds, but they aren't very severe. They're you can see them there, so you have to recognize their existence, but they aren't really significant. So it's not unusual when you get to a course that has that kind of mounding to toggle back and forth and give it a point on, say, the first time, but not the second time you see the very similar thing, and then yes again on the third and no again on the fourth, etc. Again, that's a good thing to do. It gets you a better overall rating for mounds, or measure of the significance of mounds on that course, than picking one or the other all the time and have it the same one. More R&R adjustments. Okay, you get an S+1, S standing for surrounded. If there was an S adjustment of +2 under lateral obstacles, you must also have an S+1 adjustment on R&R. There used to be a case for an S+2 coming from an S+3 on the lateral, but they've removed that S+3, so the S+2 here in R&R went away as well. Continuing, if there are excessive areas of hard pan near the green. Now we had this possible adjustment of unpleasant with respect to hard pan in the fairway. Here, if there's area of hard pan near the green, you could have a U+1. You can have a 2 times adjustment if you have heavy rough occurring on 2 or more landing zones on a 3 or more shot hole. Now it has to be at least 4-inch rough for men or 3.5-inch rough for women. Don't worry about the curly brackets. That refers to essentially Bermuda grass, the warm season grass in the States. Well, in other countries as well, but primarily we find it in the States. Then for bogey only, if the bogey player cannot reach the center of the green on a par 3 hole in one shot, or lays up for one reason or another, and the area short of the green is at least 20 yards wide and is cut to fairway height. We can't call it a fairway if it's a par 3, but we can have a little area that looks a lot like a fairway. Or if there is no such area, or if it is less than 20 yards wide, then this par 3 adjustment could be +2, or should be if there's no area or it's less than 20 yards wide. Here's a look at some of them, again, using Google Earth and its measuring function. Here, you can't tell, of course, from this slide that this is a par 3, but it is. And in this case, there is an area here. It's cut like a fairway, and it's about 24 yards wide. So in this case, the bogey that can't make it to the middle of the green here. Here's one that's narrower. It's on the same golf course, but a different hole, different par 3 hole. Here, the mode part is only about 14 yards wide. So that would qualify this as a par 3 adjustment of +2. We also have in the R&R area the bogey carry adjustment, typically found from some of the longer tee sets that maybe bogeys don't usually play, but we have to rate them anyway. You might get the situation where the bogey golfer can't even carry his or her tee shot to the fairway height area. There's a little table for that. Looking here at the carry required, say for men, from 100 to 160 yards. And remember, that would include 10 yards for the safety margin of a carry. You don't, at the shorter of these, if the rough has to be greater than 3 inches here, 4 inches here. So we mostly would get this if it's longer. If it's over 160, then for the more common 2 to 3 inch rough, we'd start to get this adjustment for the bogey golfer. For women, similar things, except that the distances involved are less because of the difference in the distance that the men and women are capable of hitting the ball. This is an easy one to miss in the field. You can be looking at the hole from the tee and say, okay, let's get down there to our landing zone. And you can end up driving right by where the fairway starts without remembering to check and see whether bogey carry is going to be possibly involved here. So try to keep aware of that. And if from the tee, when you're first looking at the hole, if you can see that the fairway starts some distance away, make sure you stop and measure back with your GPS shot measuring function or whatever to see if this qualifies for the bogey carry adjustment. Okay, R&R questions.
I don't see any questions so far.
Okay, everybody's good on that one then. Okay, the next obstacle are bunkers. Okay, how bunkers come into play and how difficult to recover from them, based on the difficulty of the green target, the fraction of the green covered by bunkers, how difficult are the bunkers to recover from. Okay, we start off looking at the table values, and as noted above, the green target is a major contributor to the bunker rating, because the more difficult the green is to hit, the more often you're likely to be in the bunker instead if there's our green side bunkers. So again, for the scratch, we come in from this column, find the green target rating that we've just got a couple of steps ago, and then consider the fraction of the green which is closely bordered by bunkers, from up to a quarter, greater than a quarter, but up to a half, greater than a half, up to 3/4, and greater than 3/4. And we'll see in a moment how we evaluate those fractions. Okay. So bunkers which are within 10 yards of the edge are closely bordering. That was our definition. But notice that it doesn't have to be the entirety of the bunker. It's just the part of the bunker that is nearest the green that tells us whether that bunker is closely bordering. All right, so here's how we can get that bunker fraction measurement. If we walk around, pace along the edge of the green, the start and finish of the sort of radius line from the middle that would go out here and here. So in my example here, let's say it was 12 paces here. And then over here you have another one, 9 paces. Notice this line here. At first glance, you say, well, that's not in the right place. Well, the reason it would be here and not down here is that there is a quite steep slope down here to the bunker and over here, so that balls will not stay up there, they'll bounce down into the bunker. So you have to be aware of that possibility. Okay, so we have then 9 plus 12 divided by 75, where 75 is the circumference of the green, diameter multiplied by, well, technically it should be multiplied by pi, which is 3.14, but we can get pretty close just by multiplying by 3. So in this case, that fraction of the whole circumference is 0.28, which is greater than a quarter, slightly greater than a quarter. So we would be using here the greater than a quarter up to a half column. Okay. Adjustments. Obstacle squeeze. Now they used to, in previous editions, they talked about distance from the middle totaling more than. They've revised that this time around, and now they say just measure from, in this case, bunker to bunker, like that. So if this is less than 30 yards, bunker to bunker, then that would be bunker squeeze. Note that it is only at fairway landing zone. The bunkers are already addressed in a different fashion that we've seen at the green itself. Okay, if this were even narrower, if the distance bunker to bunker was less than 20 yards, then it would be Q for squeeze plus 2. Adjustments. Bunker carry. If the player must carry a significant bunker or bunkers to reach a fairway landing zone. If it's the scratch we're talking about, that bunker must be near the start of the fairway landing zone. In other words, where the shot would come down. For the bogey player, the bunkers can be anywhere. Bogeys find a way to get into bunkers all the time, it seems. Or at the green, if the player must carry a greenside bunker or bunkers which protects a significant portion of the green. For the scratch players, the bunkers must be closely bordering and the green target rating must be 5 or more. For the bogey, anywhere will do. Now this is a change too. It used to be, it had to be more than half of the green protected by the bunkers. And that's now just been changed to significant portion. And the reason is that something less than half can be significant if it were, for example, a bunker that was fronting right dead center, so that the parts that were not being guarded by the bunker were at the extreme edges of the green. They might be more than half out there, but but still more of the shots have to go over the one that's heading towards the center of the green. So they're just saying, look at it and decide whether it's going to be significant. More adjustments. The church pews. Punitive bunker features making recovery from the fairway or from greenside bunkers extremely difficult, i.e. pot bunkers, sod-faced, revetted faces, extreme rough interfering with your swing, very large or a series, etc. To qualify, closely bordering the green or near a fairway landing zone. An E+2, if the features listed above impact a fairway bunker and restrict options to playing out sideways or backwards, causing a substantial loss of distance on the shot. Or I guess now, another option that one has, if one is in a bunker but has absolutely no shot, looks like it would be possible here to get under the lip of the rock and have no shot at all. You can now, for a 2-stroke penalty, take an unplayable lie from a bunker to someplace back on the line. Depth is a significant feature to bunkers, and we can have adjustments from +1 to +4 depending on the depth, the number of them, the location, and difficulty. And there is a table for that. So for min, the first break point is if the depth of the bunker is greater than 3 feet, you get a +1 D adjustment. If it's greater than 6, your adjustment is +2, and so on. For women, the first adjustment comes in if it's greater than 2 feet, and then the second greater than 5, and onward. Here's one where they've gone back. Previous to this, they came out with the statement that you would measure bunker depth from the place in the bunker to hit a shot to any part of the green. They're now going back to what it used to be, is it's the height or the, that you have to clear to get to the part of the green that has most of the pin location. So rather than just saying it's okay just to get where the pin happens to be today on this little bit down here, we have to be able to get to this bigger part up here, because that's where more of the holes are going to be located. So this essentially returns us to the previous situation before they changed it the time before this. Whoops, I got my animations out of order here, so I'll put them both up. Just a minute, I gotta take note of that so I'll remember to fix it. Okay, so we reduce the table value by 1 on a 1-shot hole because there's no fairway bunker at all. Does not apply if it's bogey who can't reach the green in 1 shot. Bogey would not get the N-1 if it was a long enough par 3, for example, that bogey can't get there off the tee. Or we reduce the table value by 1 on a 2 or more shot hole if there are no fairway bunkers near the landing zones for the scratch or anywhere along the line of play for the bogey. Greenside bunkers don't count for this purpose unless the player has a landing zone just short of the green and the green side bunkers are near that landing zone. That's that part is not new to us, of course. Okay. More on bunkers here. The two times or more times adjustment. If there are fairway bunkers near 2 or more landing zones on a 3 or more shot hole. So you'd maybe down there off the tee, then you're up here on a second shot, and there's bunkers nearby. And in both cases, you'd get this 2+1 adjustment. Here's a bunker rating example. Okay, bunker fraction in the 0 to a quarter column. The bunker must be carried. There's a 4-foot average bunker depth, and it's a par 3 hole that both players reach, resulting in a green target of scratch, a 5 for scratch and 7 for bogey. Okay, so what we're going to have then recorded on our form, that would be recorded there. We had the green targets from previous work. We would record here, just as having a place to put it. I always had to put it somewhere down here. The less than a quarter. And the codes for C for carry, D for depth, and N for no fairway bunkers because it's a par 3. So we'll expand those out later, but we can just record them this way to remind ourselves that it's there. Oh, incidentally, these spaces here and the other landing zones, it's a good idea when you're going by there, if there's a fairway bunker that you want to identify so that you won't have an N-1 on longer hole, just put a little check mark in the fields here so that you'll know that you had fairway bunkers. Okay, carrying on then. Our table, 0 to a quarter fraction covered, 5 or 6 green target. Table value is 3. Okay. And for bogey, we come here from the 7. That goes over, same column here, obviously, but that one's going to be a 4. So we have a 3 and a 4 for the table values. Okay. So going now, looking up farther into the final answer area up above here, we've put the 3 in and the 4, and then a little more detail about those adjustments. So up in here, we would put the C+1, the D+1, and the N-1, and ditto for the bogey. So in this case, we had +2, -1, so we've increased by 1 for the final values here. Questions about bunkers?
There was a question, but we found their own answer, and
okay.
That's it.
Okay. Okay, we've been on for 2 hours now, so I'm going to suggest we take maybe a 5 or 10 minute break. We get up and walk around, get a refill of your coffee or whatever it is that you might need to do for 5 or 10 minutes. Let's make it 10, so we'll know exactly when we have to be back on.
There was just another question that came in. Are you still there, Richard? We'll pick it up when we get back.
Sorry, Candace, were you talking to me? I had my headset off.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, there was just a question that came in kind of just now. Do you take bunker depth to deepest point or the average depth?
It's a sort of a combination. You have to kind of say, where is, which part of which bunker is most likely to be getting the shot. So, for example, a deep bunker that's back behind the green versus a shallower one up near the front, I'd be probably paying more attention to the shallower one at the front. On the other hand, if it's deep at the front and shallow at the back, then definitely I would take the deeper one at the front. So, and you have to also look at where in a big bunker is the ball likely to go. Is it going to collect down at the bottom, and how deep is it from there, and so on. But yeah, there's no simple answer to that. You don't have to take the average. You're like everything else we do. You're looking for the highest obstacle value that's likely to be. But as I say, if the deep one is only at the back, then you might say, well, how often is the golfer going to be long and left or something like that, versus coming up short in a bunker or one that's right beside the green if you've hit a shot of the right length. Okay, folks, let's get back into the presentation. The next thing after the bunker rating is the crossing of obstacles, and this can be crossing over either penalty area or areas which are out of bounds or extreme rough that have not been declared as penalty area. We rate them under the same conditions. Essentially, if you're crossing an object, it doesn't really matter because there's no lateral relief available anyway. Okay, just a reminder here, areas formerly rated under water hazards are now considered to be penalty areas and are rated under both the crossing and the lateral obstacle. And of course, ditto is going to be the case for the extreme rough when we get to that after this. The definition of extreme rough: cool season grass in excess of 6 inches in length. We don't have to worry about the warm season stuff. 5 inches for women. Underbrush, ice plant, we don't have that here. Tree roots, though, we have rocks, just general underbrush. We've got lots of that. Generally speaking, the rough in excess of 6 inches, in my experience around southern Saskatchewan, essentially it's fescue that has just been allowed to grow tall without any mowing ever. So it can be of a variety of height, of better than 6 inches, and a very easy place to lose a golf ball. Okay, so as I mentioned, even if some areas have not been designated as penalty by the committee, then we go ahead and rate them anyway, because it's still an obstacle whether it's been defined or not. It's just that if it hasn't been defined, then the usual rules, such for lost ball and stroke and distance penalty, would apply. But again, we're just rating it. We're not playing it and refereeing it. So the tables look like this. As you can see from the table, for the men, if the carry over the area of, say, extreme rough is less than 100 yards, essentially the table value is 0. There is no table value. And for bogey, if it's not at least 50 yards, there's no table value for bogey. For the women, similar, but it's 75 and 30 yards respectively for the scratch and bogey and women. And remember, when you're looking at the distances, include that 10-yard safety margin for safe carry of the obstacle. So an example of this using the MINS table, we're rating a 360-yard hole for min. There's a carry distance on a full tee shot, including the 10, of 165. So crossing obstacle data would be entered on the form like this. And of course, both scratch and bogey have to hit the same tee shot from the same place, and so their carries, their safe carries, will be the same in terms of the distance. Now, if we were talking about the carry on a par 3 hole from between the tee and the green, we'd be putting those values in here and here because they would essentially be the approach shots to the green. If our carry occurred not on the tee shot, but on a full second shot on a longer hole, we'd put them here. So we put them wherever they're ending up, wherever that shot is ending up is where we put the values. Okay, the tee shot, it doesn't end up at 165, obviously, but it ends up at the landing zone that's associated with the tee shot. The par 3, the landing zone is the green. It's a one-shot hole. But we could quite easily have a situation where the carry on a long hole was maybe down right in front of the green instead of off the tee. All right, so using the table then, a 165-yard shot is going to give us a scratch value of 3. That goes there, just underneath where we've put the distance. And the bogey, that 165 is in a different row here, a different value. Table value for bogey is 6, and that would be placed there. Adjustments. If the carry over a crossing obstacle closely borders the front of the green, i.e. is 10 yards or less from the front edge of the green, we would put a carry adjustment, C+1, on the rating. If a obstacle to be crossed is narrow, it's only partial, or maybe you can play from it a good portion of the time, consider applying an appropriate percentage of the table value. And they're now recommending that we just use 25, 50, or 75% values. I would expand that a little further. I would say it depends on what your table value is anyway. For example, if the value out of the table is a 3, I would tend to make my percentages either 1/3 or 2/3 because that's easy ways to divide 3 without rounding. So the 2 times, or on 2 or more shots, rating must be 5 or greater, each one of them, table values plus adjustments. And the adjustment is placed on the highest of the evaluations. Add them, all the values 5 or greater. If your total is 5 or less, the adjustment is +1. If the total is 12 or more, the adjustment is +2, unchanged from prior versions. Questions about crossing obstacles? Not hearing any. Candace, are you back with us?
I'm back.
Okay.
There is a couple, actually. I was just trying to see if you answered one of them, but one is C adjustment says if the carry over a crossing obstacle closely borders the front of the green. is it the carry that must be closely bordering or the crossing obstacle that must closely border?
Well, it's where, if we, let's see if I can go backwards here. Okay, here's an example of what they're talking about. That the safe carry point here has to be, if it's within 10 yards of the front of the green, but it's still the 10 yards past the edge, the actual edge of the penalty area, that's what they're talking about. Don't know if that answers the question. Let me see if I can think of a different way to phrase it. Obviously, your safe landing point has to be the 10 yards past the edge of the actual obstacle. And so if that point, that 10-yard point, is within 10 yards of the edge of the green, you would apply the C+1.
Okay. There's one more. I have a note from a different seminar that if it is a small carry, that the carry should be placed under fairway +1 and then place an E somewhere, but I missed where to put it.
Sorry, say that again.
Okay. Diane says, I have a note from a different seminar that if it is a small carry, that the carry should be placed under fairway +1 and then place an E somewhere, but I missed where to put it. An E.
I don't know what that would be about, but
Diane, if you wanted to just unmute, you could maybe just ask the question if I've misinterpreted it.
No, you stated it correctly. It was something new that I'd never heard, and it was in another provincial seminar, and it was the first I'd heard of this. But they seem to be quite specific that if it's a very short carry, you put it under fairway and you give it a +1. And not to put it under crossing, but they said put a small E somewhere, but I really didn't catch it.
I think I know maybe what it is. It might be, what do you do if there's a carry that does not get a numerical value for crossing and there is no lateral obstacle on the hole? To recognize the existence of the carry, you would put it in, but you'd put it in on the lateral. We're going to see that come up if that's what the question is really referring to.
Yeah, that sounds more because they were saying if it's a very, very short,
I think, I'm not positive, and we can go back and revisit it if it's not, but I think that question will end up being answered.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Diane.
Okay, so then we do move on after crossing obstacle to lateral obstacle. Okay, and this is just an evaluation of how the lateral obstacle, either penalty areas or OB extreme rough, come into play. We rate them the same. There's just a minor difference whether it's treated as a penalty area or not. Okay, based on distance of the obstacle from the center of the landing zone or green and the shot length to get there. Same concept as before. The longer the shot, the more likely you are to get into difficulty, and the closer to center the difficulty is to be found will obviously have that impact too. So here are the obstacle rating tables. And again, just a reminder, these columns have been reversed from what's in the guide as it comes from WHS, just to have the numbers go in the more normal small to large, left to right sequence. Lateral adjustments then. B+1, if the presence of a cart path or sloping ground increase the likelihood that the ball will bounce out of bounds or into the penalty area or other obstacle. And a note, we must not apply B+1 if the distance from the center of the landing zone is less than 15 yards. The point here being that at less than 15 yards, that goes all the way down. That's a column that goes all the way down, even shorter than that, and that the table value is the maximum value they want to see used as far as that is concerned. Or we could have a B-1 if things like fences, trees, other obstacles decrease the likelihood that the ball will bounce into or fly into the obstacle. Or, and here something that they've added, or if the obstacle comes in play only behind the green. You'll recall how we used to deduct 1 point from obstacles that were only behind the green, but it didn't really have an official adjustment name. They've now said, well, that will be part of this B-1 adjustment. Okay, if an area, a lateral area, is not a penalty area, and in other words, it's probably going to be either OB or extreme rough, and a stroke and distance penalty will apply because it's not treated as a penalty area, then to recognize that, we have a K+1 adjustment that we would add. So essentially this is to be added if the type of relief that you take is stroke and distance, as opposed to simply the lateral form of relief that can be used with penalty areas. Okay, the percentage, if the obstacle is very narrow, if it only borders part of the landing zone, if it can be played from some of the time, and or a significant barrier minimizes the chance that the shot might reach the lateral obstacle, consider using an appropriate percentage of the table value plus any other adjustments to determine the rating value. And again, they're suggesting that we get in the habit of just using 25%, 50%, or 75%, rounded, of course, to an integer for the percentage adjustments. All right, we can have obstacle squeeze on lateral obstacles. You'll recall we had that for bunkers. This is similar, except that the distance requirements are somewhat different. If the fairway landing zone has lateral obstacles bordering both sides, such that the distance between those obstacles is less than 40 yards, we would get a squeeze, a Q+1. And if the distance between the lateral obstacles is less than 30 yards, we would get a Q+2 adjustment. The surround, if a green is closely surrounded by crossing and or lateral obstacles, if the green target is 5 or greater for the scratch, but maybe any value for the bogey player, we get the adjustment shown in this table. Okay, you look at the fraction of the green surrounded, and you can determine that in the same way that you determine the fraction of a bunker that is surrounded. So we've got the greater than a quarter, up to a half, greater than a half. We only have the two categories here. And the proximity of the penalty area, or OB or ER, to the edge of the green, 5 to 10 yards or less than 5 yards determines what adjustment value would be applied. And if the +2 is applied here, a reminder to something we saw back under R&R, if that is the case, if there's S+2 on lateral obstacle, there must also be an S+1 adjustment under R&R. Continuing on, for that surrounded adjustment, in determining the fraction of the green surrounded, consider conditions that can decrease or increase the likelihood of the lateral obstacles coming into play. So, in other words, this bunker here would mean that this section here probably should not be counted for the fraction that of the green that is surrounded, simply because it's likely that a shot that's long enough will be coming down in the bunker here rather than coming up as short. If this retaining wall followed the contour of the green around here, there'd be much more likelihood of it getting into the water than into the bunker. And if lateral obstacles occur on 2 or more shots, so this is going to happen quite a bit when you've got any of your 3-shot or more holes, there's going to be the possibility of lateral and 2 or more shots. And again, if they each have to be 5 or greater, we add them together. If they total 11 or less, the value of the adjustment is +1. If they total 12 or more, it's +2. And obviously we apply it to the highest of the separate ones. And this next one is maybe the answer to that earlier question. If you have a crossing obstacle which exists, but the table value under crossing obstacle is 0, we can record it under lateral obstacles to satisfy the it exists concept. So if there's no lateral adjustment or lateral obstacle table value does exist already, you would not apply this. So under 2 conditions, there's a crossing that's not long enough crossing to generate a table value there. There are no lateral obstacles that have already generated a table value there. Then we would put this in under the lateral area just as a bare existence. So maybe that was the question that we were trying to answer earlier. The idea being to recognize the existence of the obstacle with a minimal value of 1 if there are no other actual values already in play. Okay, here's an example. We're going to use the women's table this time. A 380-yard hole. The hole runs straight tee to green. Excuse me. The lateral obstacle runs along the right side the entire length of the hole. And so the team measures the lateral distance from the center of the fairway and the center of the green to the lateral obstacle. So here's what the course rater who is responsible for recording for that particular tee for women would be doing. Okay, from a 380 for women, the book value or theoretical value for the remaining shot would be 380 minus the 210 drive that a scratch woman averages. That leaves us with 170. For bogey, we'd have a first landing at 180 minus 150, and a second one subtracting another 130 for the bogey woman's second shot would be there. And here's what they've recorded for the lateral distances. At Scratch's fairway landing, 26. At the green, 19. For bogey's first landing, 24. And bogey's second fairway landing, 25. Obviously, the lateral distance at the green is the same for both. Okay, and we add one bit more of information that the course rating team observed that at bogey's first landing zone, the ground sloped towards the penalty area. So we'll just jot that in as a shot-specific adjustment here. At bogey's first landing, we will want to have a B+1 adjustment. Okay, how do we interact now with the table? Well, tee shot 190 to a 26, that's in this column. You'll note that there is one place where my table has a tweener inserted down here. So we're going to get a 5 off the table. So the table value at this landing zone is a 5, and that goes on the form down here. Approach shot is 170, and the lateral distance at the green is 19. So that will be a 5 at the green. That goes over there. Then we'll do the same thing for bogey. The full tee shot gets a 5. That goes in there. Notice now we've got that B+1 shot specific adjustment on this shot. So there is an adjusted table value at this landing. It's now 6. Bogey's second shot, 130-yard shot. That's going to get a 4, which goes in here. And for bogey's approach shot to the green, the 100-yard shot, to the 19 measurement at the green, that's going to be a 5, which goes in over here. Now we want to go up to the final answer area. Highest value is a 5 for Scratch, but we have 2 of them, and the total is 10. So we're going to have a 2+1 adjustment up here. And the final value, the total is 6. Okay, for bogey, the highest value is actually 6. It was a 5, but with the B+1, it becomes a 6. We also have a 5 over here. Our total is 11. So again, we have a 2+1 adjustment, which for bogey goes here. And we've taken the highest value, the 6, added the 2+1 adjustment, and we get a 7 for the final value for bogey. Questions? I guess maybe the first one is, have we satisfactorily answered the question about the very short carry?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so there's a question on here. Would you apply to K+1 adjustments where you have OB from tee to green on a 3-shot hole, and the distance of the OB are as follows. I don't know if you want to write this down, but tee shot, landing zone 25 yards to OB, table value equals 5. Second shot, landing zone 18 yards to OB, table value equals 5.
And so the question was, would there be a 2+1 adjustment?
Yeah.
Yes, there would, because on both of those landing zones, there's been the table value, and it is 5 or greater in both cases. The total of them is 10, so it's only a 2+1. It's not a 2+2.
Hi, Richard, if I may, it was whether you do 2 K+1 adjustments, not the 2+1.
Oh, K adjustments.
Yes.
Yeah, if you're looking at the essentially, so what we're talking about here is not actually penalty area, but it's maybe out of bounds or just been undefined, so it's extreme rough, where stroke and distance would apply. Is that what we're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, K, if you'll note in your guide, the K adjustment has the asterisk, so it is shot specific, and therefore, yes, you would, since it occurred each time, both of those values would be 6s instead of 5s. So your total would be 12 or more. So you would, in that case, it would be, the 2 adjustment would be +2.
Okay, and then Pat says, I think this is just talking about that last part you were talking about. Her shot was only 100 yards.
Yes.
I'm not sure if that's a question. I don't know, Pat, if you want to elaborate a bit on that.
I'm gonna interpret it as, why doesn't that count? And the answer is that it's only a 4. And to get your 2 adjustment, you can only add together the ones which have a value of 5 or more. So we can only use the 6 and the 5. We cannot use the 4 because it's not a large enough value. If this were another 5, we would add them all together and we'd have 16, and we'd have a 2+2 instead of a 2+1. But this one at 100 yards does not generate a high enough value to be included in the assessment of the 2+1 or 2+2 adjustments.
But Richard, you went to the chart and went to the 130-yard place instead of the 100-yard place.
Well, no, that's a range. In the table.
No, but the table was 100 to 114.
Yeah.
And you went down to 130.
No, the 130 was the tee shot, or the first. The 130 was the second shot, and that's where we got the 4. Was it not?
It was only 100 yards was her shot.
Yeah, this is a 3-shotter for her.
Yeah.
So we had the second shot, which would have been a 130-yard to a 25, which is in this column here. So that's where the 4 came from, the 130-yard shot. The 100-yard shot was actually the shot to the green, the approach shot, which got the other 5.
Okay, thanks. Sorry.
Okay. Where am I now? Which way am I going? Okay, any other questions about lateral obstacles?
I don't see any on the chat.
Okay. Next is trees. And as you'll recall, the trees rating was changed significantly a few years ago. We no longer take the actual measurements to the trees and so on the way we used to, but rather we're trying to come up with sort of an overall assessment of how trees impact the play on the whole. And there are some things about trees that are the case for trees and not for other obstacles. In particular, trees along the line of play that maybe have overhanging branches that can also be a problem. So let's just go through all of the slides, and most of these are ones that came directly from, well, USJ at that time, World Handicap System now. So we're really just looking to see what degree of problem trees are going to cause on this hole. Okay, we definitely have a look at the different landing zones and at the green to see what effect the trees would have there. We look along the line of play. Are there overhanging branches that could get in the way? As is the case on all of our ratings of obstacles, the length of the shot has its effect because of the accuracy tables. And as a result, the probability of getting trees into the trees is higher at the green, or sorry, at the tee usually, or the tee shot, unless the trees are really in pretty close at the green. Okay, so generally what we see at the tee shot landing zone will be the most important. Not always, but mostly. Okay, the tree table is pretty simple looking. We distinguish between one-shot holes and two or more shot holes, simply because on a one-shot hole, you only have one opportunity to go astray, and your shots will tend to be less than full driver shots. Okay, and for the two or more shot holes, there are tweeners possible, and in fact, we are encouraged to use them when we figure it's important. Okay, so here's all the things we have to consider based on the scratch player's ability. The length of the shot, the number, height, and density at mid-season of the trees at each landing area, and this is the big difference, along the line of play to the next target. Distance of the trees from the center of the landing zone. That's similar to all lateral obstacles. Presence of low-hanging branches that might interfere with your swing if you were in under the trees. And what kind of shot is required? Do we have a shot that's intended to be to another fairway landing zone, or is it intended to reach the green? That can make a difference too. Proximity of trees to the line of flight, conditions under the trees. Again, what's between where you are in the trees and, oh, there's something that they should have changed. It shouldn't be a water hazard anymore. It should be a penalty area, but not, the thought is still the same. So what that really means, that last one, is if the only way of getting out of the trees is to punch a low shot out, and if it were sort of just open fairway to the green, you might be able to punch it out and have it get up to the green. But if there's a penalty area, a pond along that same line of play, then that low shot is not going to work, because it's not going to clear the water if it's water that you're talking about. And we're talking about how well the scratch golfer can recover from trees, even when we're rating for the bogey player. And there's an explanation coming here as to why we do that. But first, what do the situations look like? For a scratch player, this would be considered a minor recovery problem. Scratch players capable of working the ball right to left or left to right can probably, from where this picture is taken, can probably get a shot out and maybe curve it around to get it to the green, or it's wide open, maybe a low shot will run up onto the green. So minor problem. Moderate problem, it's similar to the previous one, but the trees are much bigger. The ability to get out with a high shot is less than it was on that other slide. Significant problem, the trees are so close together that you're in there. Are you even going to have a swing? Or maybe you will, but it might be just a little abbreviated chip shot type of a swing. Or extreme recovery problems. Generally, trees, more often than not, they're coniferous trees with branches that droop right down near ground level, and you have no swing at all in there. Okay, what about here? Can this person, assuming he's a scratch player, is he going to be able to get onto the green? Well, maybe. There's an area of the green over here that looks like it's available, and if you look at the line of his feet, that seems to be where he's aiming. Okay, so a bit of explanation here. If you want to read this at your leisure, I would suggest going to the online manual that's available. It replaces the old printed manuals that we used to be issued, as well as the printed guides. But basically what they're saying here is that they think of trees as sort of being an overall condition of the whole. Some, situations here. Long par 4, tightly line the fairway. If you're offline by as little as 15 yards, you could hit overhanging branches that would limit how much distance you get. Any reduction in distance would require an extra shot to reach the green. That's a fairly significant point when we're evaluating trees. Here's another case. On a dog leg, hitting the fairway on one side may result in the trees obscuring the next shot. However, it's a par 5 3-shotter, and the player would still be able to reach probably a different landing zone than if he or she was not in the trees, but still one from which the green could be reached on the 3rd shot. This same situation, if the hole was just a 2-shotter, trees would be more significant, since the player might not be able to get to the green from the trees. Most of the trees on a hole are within extreme rough, and they are not near a landing zone. There's a large tree in the middle that affects landing zone in a number of ways. Can't play over it, you can play around it. So this would have an impact. Okay, there are not going to be many adjustments here to trees either. And here's the question about, why do we rate for bogey players using the scratch player's ability? Well, that was the question. And this is the explanation. First, scratch players are more consistent than bogey players. It's very difficult to predict how a bogey player is going to recover from trees. They don't have all the same shots in their bag that the scratch players have. So there are just so many ways that the bogey player can go wrong that you can't really come up with anything at all consistent. Okay. And then they mention it, and this is way probably more technical than we need to spend a lot of time on, but they're talking about within the calculations that the computer application makes on all of the input values, the weighting factor for trees is higher for bogey than it is for scratch, to recognize the fact that their abilities are less and they might not be able to pull off the recoveries in the same way. So anyway, this, from a practical point of view, this is something I made up a few years ago when they first went to the new way of dealing with trees. And it's kind of a matrix that can combine the major factors, i.e. the probability of being in the trees in a given situation, with the difficulty in getting out of them, into a matrix that might be helpful in assigning tree rating values. So this is divided into 3 sections. Up top, above the green shading, this is what happens on a par 3 hole, a one-shotter, except for bogey, who can't reach the green, in which case it'd be more like the 2-shotter. But if you're going to successfully recover from trees on a par 3 hole, you better be able to get on the green most of the time to have a minor problem. Scratch, getting on or near the green half the time, recovery, that would be a moderate situation. If scratch can rarely get onto the green, that's a pretty significant problem. And if all scratch can do is just chip out laterally and or take an unplayable, or if it's a penalty area instead of trees, that would be a way out too. But if it's just trees, that option would not be available. So then you look here at an estimate of what percentage of the time do you think the scratch could get on the green? More than 75, 51 to 75, 26 to 50, 1 to 25, or no chance at all. Then we could look at assigning from that par 3 values of 1 to 4, which is the range of table values for the one-shotter. Then if the situation where it's a 2-shot hole, where the next shot normally is expected to be on the green, once again, we have scratch gets on most of the time, on or near the green about half the time, rarely get on or near, must pitch out or unplayable. And then 4 different rows based on the probability of being in the trees. And that would be sort of the equivalent of what we used to do when we actually measured the distance to the trees. This would be sort of low probability would be, well, the trees are there, but they're pretty far away, all the way to a high probability. Those trees are there and they're pretty close to me. And then you have to look also at the recovery. And so our different values up to the maximum of 8 are found by picking sort of a row and column here. And then the bottom third, if the next shot is not going to reach the green anyway, but only another fairway landing zone, then things are not quite as serious. And you look at, can reach the fairway landing zone most of the time, or can advance the ball at least far enough to be able to reach the green with a longer next shot, cannot advance the ball far enough that he or she will be able to reach the green, or must pitch out or take an unplayable lie. So, and then again, we have those values all the way from 2 to 7, depending on the combination of recoverability and probability of being in the trees. So if there are trees on a hole, chances are we're going to want to at least give it a 2 rating. And then we go up from there based on both the difficulty in recovery or the proximity to the center of the landing zone that will influence how likely it is that the ball will go into the trees at all. So what I must remember, we need to probably send out new ones of this, but the Saskatchewan Raiders all had a copy of this that they took with them, stuck in their guide to help out when we got to the trees. Now we've been doing it long enough, we're probably a little more comfortable doing it without referring to the piece of paper. But if this is of help to you in getting a handle on possible ways to come up with the tree rating value, then that would be good. The obstruction, if a tree obstructs the shot to the target, either landing zone or green, except if that shot has already been used in a shoot adjustment on that same shot. But you can see here in the picture, there's a green, there's its flag, but some parts of the green would be obstructed by these trees. So if the shot in is requiring a high trajectory, that's definitely going to obstruct the shot to the green. And it's difficult to tell here, but it looks like these trees can be quite a ways back, so they very likely would be in play here. And the shoot now has its own adjustment code. It's called H because that wasn't used, and it's one of the letters in the word shoot. And it's anywhere from 1 to 4. If the shot must be hit through a narrow chute, the amount of adjustment depending on the width and the length of the chute. There's a table on page 30 of the guide. Here's an example. There's what would be the width of the chute. It's only 12 yards wide. And the narrowest part is located, say, 70 yards from the tee. The chute table locates the width of the possible chute. Here it would be 12 yards would be there. Then moves across until you find the shot length range that includes the shot in question. And it was 70 yards, so that would be the first column over here. Values or shots of 60 to 83 yards. And then you go straight down to find the chute adjustment at the bottom. So here we'd be applying with a code H, an H+1 adjustment to trees. And the note here, if there's no shot length range that corresponds to your width, there is no chute. So down here with the wider ones, and particularly as they get farther away, there are, these ones here where there's no value, there is no chute adjustment. And a note here, as you go along, it's helpful to record a tree rating value at each landing zone. So when you're completing the hole, you can look back and say, okay, where were trees the most significant problem, and what sort of problem did I think they were at the time as I was looking at that landing zone? And there's place here, in the obstacle form, you can just jot down your little notes here. Maybe here you thought they were a 4, okay, put that in. At another landing, you thought they were only a 3, put that in, and so on. Questions about trees?
Yes. Trees. Is the rating more about how much they will come into play versus how difficult they are to recover from?
Well, how likely they are to come into play, essentially, I would look back at those accuracy tables, or the accuracy patterns that we saw, and that will show you that, as always, the longer the shot and the closer to the middle of the fairway, the more likely it is that your accuracy table or your accuracy patterns are going to get close to those trees. So it's the same as all obstacles, really. The longer the shot you have and the closer the obstacle is to the center of the fairway at the landing zone, the more trees are going to be a factor. So that would be how you would determine the probability of being in the trees, and then you would go over into those trees and look around and try to assess what kind of recoverability you have.
Okay.
And just a further to that, when you're doing trees, don't just go motoring down the fairway and look at the trees sort of sideways and say, okay, I think that's about a 4 or whatever. Actually go over and walk in under the trees, assuming they're ones that you can walk under, and have a look from there. You'll get a much better feeling for the recoverability.
Okay. The tree chart, not the chute one, but the one that the Saskatchewan raters have, a couple of people really like that chart. So we can send, Brian said we can send that out to all the provincial associations.
Oh, sure. There's been a bunch of things, the spreadsheet to do landing zones and things like that. There's a bunch of things. Just let Brian know what you would like, and we can certainly, I have that trees page on a separate document that I'll make sure Brian has, and just let him know that you want one, and that can be sent along. It's just a printable document that you can print as many copies as you like.
Sounds great. There's another one here. Is there a chute adjustment on a 160-yard par 3 with trees all the way along the chute to the green, 25 yards wide chute?
Okay, so the chute, the chute is how wide?
25 yards.
Okay, so for 25 yards, you'd be way down here. Okay. So yes, if it were that narrow all the way down, i.e. greater than 181 yards to the narrowest point, or still narrow that far out, then yeah, you could get a +2 from that.
Okay. There's one more here. Your guidelines suggested that if you had to chip out versus hit the green, the rate would be high regardless of the likelihood of getting in.
Well, yeah, you have to look at both. If you look at that that matrix, there's a lot of different values you can get for having to chip out depending on the probability of you getting in the first place. So you have to do both. Let's go back. Let's go back to that. You know, having to pitch out laterally or be unplayable can happen with a low probability that you're going to be in there, i.e. they're probably not that close to your green or to your landing zone. Or it can be very high, and that would tend to happen if the trees are pretty close to the center of the line of play as well. And same thing down here. The need to pitch out will be tempered by how likely it is that you get in there in the first place. So again, you could have values anywhere from, say, from here, if it was at the green, a shot to the, you could have values anywhere from 5 to 8 having to pitch out. 5 if it's not very likely that you get into those trees. 8 if it's quite, you know, relatively likely that you're going to get into those trees. I don't, does that answer the question?
Lauren, is your question answered? Yes, he said it's answered. Thanks,
Okay.
Richard. And then there's a question about, is there a link that I can access to print the tables and forms at home?
To print the adjusted tables? No, we would, you know, the tables are smaller. You're talking about the tables that are with the order of the columns changed. That's a small enough file it can be emailed and printed. It's an Excel spreadsheet, so it's not that big a file. That doesn't have to be downloaded. You could just request that and it could be emailed to you. It's probably something though that, so that all the course raters are doing it with the same set of tables. That's a decision I think probably should be done on an association level so that everybody's guides have the same tables. So that should be a discussion within your organization as to whether you want to convert and use that kind of table or the ones that are in the book as it comes from WHS. I think it would be probably confusing if some raters within an association were using one set of tables, even though you get the same results, but just in terms of the way you're doing it, it's probably better if everybody's doing it the same way. But you know, that's really up to your province to decide. And certainly the tables can be printed at home. I would again not recommend doing it on an inkjet printer unless you can also laminate them.
Thanks, Richard. That's all I see for right now.
Okay, well, let's see if we can get back to where we were. Okay, the next one is green surface. And green surface, of course, is a rating of how difficult the green is for putting. Okay, what makes greens difficult to putt on? Well, it could be the speed of the greens or the contouring and or slope of the surface. Here's the table that we use for green surface. As you can see, we've got Whoops, didn't want that one yet. We've got rows here based on the stimp meter speed, and we've got columns based on the slope or contour or combination thereof of the green. Most greens in Saskatchewan, we find, are either here 7 to 8'5", or here 8'6" to 9'11". There are a few courses that'll run them speedier than that, but most would be in there. As they usually say, from looking province to province, your results may vary. Just some note here, if we're talking about the degree of slope as opposed to the contour, if you look at the relatively flat ones will be where there's less than a 2-to-1 ratio between the downhill and uphill. If you're from ratios of 2-to-1 to 3-to-1, you'd be considered moderately sloped, or steeply sloped if the ratio of stimp speeds down and up is 3-to-1, or greater than 3-to-1, I should say. Okay, and in the ones where you have two values, one in parentheses, the first one is the scratch, and the one in parentheses is the bogey rating. That on the faster ones, they separate out at the moderate or steeply sloped ranges. Okay, and another note here, if the green is tiered, as we discussed earlier, then it's considered to be at least moderately contoured. And a green divided into 3 or more circles due to surface contours or tiers is considered to be highly contoured. What do they look like? Well, there's one that looks relatively flat. And there's one, we're starting to see a little bit of contour. There, over there, moderately contoured. This might start to address that question we had earlier. If a green goes uphill and then sort of over a crest and then back downhill, it's probably going to be considered moderately contoured. Highly contoured starts to look more like this, and you definitely have a lot of breaks and rolls in it. Whoops. Let's get back. So most of the greens in Saskatchewan that we've rated tend to either be relatively flat or moderately contoured, probably more moderately contoured, or as we mentioned earlier, where they're kind of right at the point where we can't tell whether we should be calling them relatively flat or moderately contoured. And that's where you can use that toggling approach to alternate between calling them relatively flat and moderately contoured. A little bit of a story here. This is a number of years ago now. I was attending the USGA calibration workshop in the Phoenix area, and they put us into teams. There were 25 teams. We on a lot of the holes that we were test rating. The group I was in, and we agreed. We said, no, those look relatively flat. Well, guess what? 24 of the 25 called them moderately contoured. So all of a sudden, we sort of said, well, okay, I guess. And as a result, we are now a little more towards the moderately contoured side than we used to be. Because after all, if the majority of golf associations are rating them that way, then we should not be different. That's one of the purposes of having these sessions, is to ensure that we're doing it uniformly. And it's not necessarily so much what we choose to do, is everybody doing it the same way. Okay, yeah, here's mention of that toggling that we sometimes do. All right, here's an example. Stimp meter speed, 9'2" is the average. The roll downhill is 15 feet. The roll uphill, 7 feet for the majority of the green. What's the green surface rating? Well, this puts us in the 8'6" to 9'11" range. The ratio downhill to uphill is greater than 2 to 1. So that puts us here. We're a moderately contoured or moderately sloped green. And so the green surface rating would be 6. Possible adjustments: unpleasant turf conditions, if there's bare spots or rough spots on the green surface, and they look like they're there for the long haul, not just something that's in the process of being resodded or something like that, we could put a U+1 adjustment on. Or if the circle concept has been applied in determining the effective green diameter, and there's part of the green you can't putt to from another part, then that would be an unpleasant situation, U+1. And for bogey ratings only, T+1 if the green is tiered. Now, remember, for both the scratch and bogey player got a tiered adjustment on green target. Only the bogey gets a tier adjustment on green surface. Questions?
I don't see any questions.
Thank you. Okay. Psychological, or how does this shot get into your head? Now, we don't have to actually perform the psychological rating. It's built into the computer application, but it's useful to know just a little bit about it. Okay. There is a table, and incidentally, we used to have in the course rating system the instruction that there should be a 2 rating in both the first and last holes. That has been removed because holes are now being used in different combinations with 27 hole courses and so on. They said no, that's gone. Okay, so here's what happens. Rating of 0 unless there are at least 3 obstacles rated 5 or greater and they total 20 or more points. So here you got the number of 5 or graters. Here are the sums. So an example would be, say, here for scratch, the 5 or higher are in red, and ditto for bogey here. So here for scratch, we had 4 obstacles, 5 or higher, and they add up to 22. Bogey, we have 6, 5 or higher, adding up to 36. So scratch would be there. We'd get a psych value of 3. Bogey would be here and would get a psych value of 5. But as I say, the software does this for us now, but it's interesting to know where it comes from. There are adjustments, and again, these are made automatically by the software. An extreme adjustment, if you have one obstacle rated 10, then the minimum psych rating would be 5. If you have on that hole 2 or more obstacles that are rated at 10, the psych rating minimum would be 9. You don't get that many 10s, so it doesn't happen that often. And then for the bogey women only, for their crossing or lateral ratings for 5, 6, or 7, their minimum psych rating would be 3, 6, or 10, respectively. Questions? Not one we usually.
Nothing so far, Richard.
Yeah, there's not one that we normally get many questions about. Just sort of a summation here. In general, obstacle ratings of about 4 are about of average significance. And so 5 and above, it's more significant than average. That's why for the scratch, we so often say it must be 5 or higher to make sure that it's not just an average one. And then values 3 or less, progressively less significant than the average. Okay, we're almost done here. Just a quick review of some of the procedures that we need to follow. If I can get, there we go. If there are multiple tees on a hole that are 25 or less yards apart, we don't have to do separate obstacle ratings for each of those. We can do a single rating using the one that's played the most. So we rate them. If let's say we had a black and a blue tee and they were within 25 yards, and the black isn't played that often compared to the blues, but we could use the same obstacle ratings for both and do them from the blue, from the more often played one. However, it's possible that one or more of the yardages may be subject to effective playing length adjustment. And if that results in them no longer having an effective playing length within 25 yards of one another, you should not use the same set of obstacle values. They should be rated separately. For multiple sets of tees, for men, if an association chooses, it's not necessarily to obstacle rate tees 7,000 yards or longer, or for women 6,000 yards or longer. We would use the EPL corrections and obstacle ratings for both the scratch and bogey player from the nearest set of tees less than 7,000 or 6, and put the actual real yardage in, since as we've discussed earlier, the yardage is about 95% of the rating in any case. In Saskatchewan, we typically do not obstacle rate for women 6,000 yards or greater if there is another one, and say in the 5,900s, that we can upload from there. We don't have enough that are 7,000 yards to really for that to be an issue. But again, that's a decision that each authorized association makes. It's very time consuming to rate a 6,000 plus yard hole for women, simply because there's so many landing zones, so many shots or greens that they can't take a number of shots to reach. We do in Saskatchewan provide ratings for them, though, using this technique of taking the highest one under 6,000 and using this technique to put the longer yardages in. We provide a set of ratings for 4,000 yards. It's also permissible to do the same thing on the shorter end of the stick. We typically don't do that in Saskatchewan. And just a note, if you got a set of tees under 3,000 yards for 18 holes, you have a short course, and you don't do a normal course rating of a short course because there's no slopes in a short course. How many raters per team? Well, in Saskatchewan, what we try to do is we look at how many tees we have to obstacle rate. And we want, if possible, to have an experienced course rater for each set of tees. So if a hole maybe has 3 sets that we're going to rate for men, and we're only going to rate 2 of them for women in terms of the measurements, because the third one is more than 6,000 yards, we would want to have a team of at least 5 course raters for that particular course. And then if we have rookies, we might also assign rookies to gain field experience, because after all, if they don't get experience, they're never going to be experienced raters. And if that's the case, each rookie will be assigned to work 1 set of tees along with the experienced rater who's got that tee set. We haven't been able to do this under the COVID situations. We haven't been training new course raters because of the need for them to work, the rookies to work one-on-one in close proximity to the experienced raters. We can't really make that work without violating COVID protocol. So we've got the training of new raters kind of on hold right now until the COVID situation is resolved. And again, in a more general sense, when we're rating courses sort of close to home for most of our raters, and we don't have extensive travel or overnight expenses, we would add some additional experienced raters in order that all of our raters get some field experience every year and don't get don't forget what the system's all about. Now, once again, COVID restrictions have put the kibosh on that for the time being. Not quite to the extent it does for rookies, but given that one of our COVID response is that we don't carpool going to courses to rate while COVID restrictions are in effect, unless the raters are involved or already in one household or in one bubble and are riding together all the time, playing golf and doing other things. One other thing here, we rate under the assumption that play is in accordance with the rule of golf. And sort of adding to this, there's no slide for it, but even if the committee, or maybe I did put in a slide, I'll see it. And before that, we'll talk about mid-season conditions. And what to do if bogey can't play the hole. Okay, here the bogeyman's 200-yard tee shot plunges into the pond on this 520-yard hole. What do we do? Well, to get a rating, we assume he gets across, even though he can't. We use the maximum crossing value plus adjustments, and we rate any lateral obstacles up here where we assume he gets to. Okay, If it's a fairway, we measure it. If not, assign the scratch fairway value for that area +1. And the location of the next landing zone on this 3-shot hole is based on the shot length table, not on where we've artificially made a landing zone. So it would be 280 out here at about 150 from the hole, because if he'd had a landing zone here, this is where he would have got to on his second shot. Okay, I will refer you to page 6 of the guide for more information, other situations where bogey can't play the hole. Re-rating. Most courses must be re-rated within 10 years. Now again, World Handicap System is knowledgeable about the COVID situation, and we're not going to be turning people's course ratings off if we can't get them done, and they, in the 10th year. We just have to deal with it as best we can. New courses undergoing extensive changes should be re-rated within 5 years of their first rating. And again, we're not going to be overly anal about this, given the COVID restrictions that we have to deal with. Okay, so I didn't get to the one that I thought I might have put a slide in, but what it was about was that it doesn't matter for course rating purposes whether the let me get out of here, whether the committee of a golf club has identified penalty areas or not. If it's something that could be called a penalty area, we rate it as if it were a penalty area. And most courses are now doing that anyway, simply because it improves their pace of play. Boy, that's a tongue twister. Okay, so that takes us to the end of the slide set. We've got a few minutes left before 1 o'clock, so if anybody wants to ask a couple more questions, we'll try to answer them. Oh, maybe we've answered everybody's questions. Good. As I mentioned earlier, we're certainly willing to share. Sean, are you still on the call? I don't know whether Sean's still on or not. No, I guess he had to go. Because what we might do is upload the slide set to Huddle that Golf Canada has as a resource for course rating, or if that isn't the way it ends up, Brian and I will figure up some place we can put it that you can get a link to download the slide set to use in your jurisdiction. Again, just a reminder, it is all of the details of the course rating system are considered intellectual property, and they are available for course raters and regional associations, provincial associations, but the slide set in its entirety should not be made available on a permanent basis to others than your volunteers and your staff. And again, all of the other stuff, the spreadsheets and so on, we're more than willing to make those available to you. I will make sure Brian gets a copy of that trees one that you'll also then be able to request.
Yeah, Richard, what we'll do is on our website, golfsaskatchewan.org, underneath the volunteer and learn, if you scroll into that area, you'll see a course rating section. We'll put some links up with the information from this session. For those who are with their provincial association or that we have direct emails to, I'll actually upload the presentation onto the Golf Canada website. You can download it and use it as you see fit with Richard's information that he did provide. But on behalf of everyone who's attending, Richard, thanks very much for being the facilitator for the course rating topics, and special thanks too to Candace for monitoring the chat function during this. So thanks everyone again on behalf of Golf Saskatchewan and from coast to coast.